I'd like to welcome the Minister to the House as well. It is beyond dispute that the massive problems faced by ordinary families throughout the country have in large part been caused by the toxic relationship between politicians, developers and bankers. The report of the Mahon Tribunal lays bare to all of us the extent to which this toxic relationship extended to the planning process. Several modules in the Mahon Tribunal focus on irregular planning decisions in the town of Swords, the largest town in my constituency of Dublin North. 25 years ago, Swords was a village in North County Dublin. Now it is a vibrant town with a population equivalent to Waterford City. If a Swords resident wishes to map the transformation of his or her town, it is very sad that they will have to refer to the Mahon report for a record on how certain planning decisions were made in their town. These planning decisions were made against the advice of county managers and other local councillors. Swords is a town still coming to terms with the infrastructure needed for a town of its size. This is because of the decisions made by some corrupt councillors 20 years ago. A chronicle of betrayal, ignominy and disgrace. Those were the words used by Taoiseach Eamon Gilmore in this House this week to describe the report of the Mahon Tribunal. 6 simple words to describe a 14-year, multi-million euro investigation into the very heart of what was rotten at all levels of Irish politics. 6 simple words to describe the root of a problem whose branches have stretched to poorly developed communities, inadequate infrastructure, ghost estates, and a plethora of related problems for ordinary people. I represent a constituency, Dublin North, which has a focal point, along with the west of Dublin, of the Mahon Tribunal's investigations. It was common knowledge among those with an interest in local politics that certain councillors were on the take and that the rezoning of certain areas of North County Dublin were the result of corrupt activities and inappropriate payments. As a political activist in the 1990s, I was certainly aware of what was going on. It seemed to me that everyone was aware. The phrase "the dogs in the street" comes to mind. When Labour was fighting elections to the council and indeed to the Dáil on shoestring budgets, we could see the largesse being thrown about by politicians that we knew were on the take. As a result of a series of tribunals, it is now official and denial is no longer possible. It took the heavy scrutiny from the Tribunal's inquiry, supported by members of the public, certain strong people in the media and, it must be said, upstanding public representatives, to finally bring the grubby practices of corrupt councillors and developers to light. I know in my constituency of Dublin North, Labour councillors led the charge against questionable rezonings. Sean Ryan and Tom Kelleher were very strong in their opposition to the corrupt rezonings, and it is encouraging to read this being reflected a number of times in the Mahon report, where they sponsored motions to undo the damage of the rezoning coalition partners. Councillors Ken Farrell and Bernie Malone also fought the good fight against the corrupt rezonings, and I have to say I'm proud of my constituency colleagues in all of these matters. It is important for the public to know that even back nearly 20 years ago, there were good, honest public representatives discharging their duties honourably, and there were people in all parties doing so as well. The Labour Party did not need costly tribunals, media scrutiny, or the heavy weight of public moral force to act against corrupt or inappropriate planning. We voiced our outrage at the time. We expelled the lone wrongdoer in our midst, and the public record reflects this. I am disappointed, therefore, that the media coverage of the Mahon report this week is slow to acknowledge this and give us the credit we deserve. I listened to Deputy Claire Daly earlier, who came up with a ridiculous attempt to link Labour to the problem by reference to Pat Rabbitte, who indeed was commended by Mahon, and I think that's beyond belief. I turn to recommendations in the report. To quote the report itself, the corrupt and the corruptible will inevitably gravitate to the weakest link in the chain of anti-corruption measures. Therefore, the task before us is to make sure there is no weak link, no area which can be exploited by those who wish to place profit above the public good. There are many recommendations from the report, but the one which should be implemented immediately is that any politician found guilty of taking bribes be stripped of his or her lucrative pension. The Public Bodies Corrupt Practices Act 1889 needs to be extended to cover those found guilty of taking bribes. It is an affront to the ordinary people of Ireland that former public representatives are in receipt of public pensions after being found guilty of corrupt practices. This recommendation should happen, and should happen as soon as possible. I also believe this should be extended to include those found guilty of having misled a tribunal, those found to have told untruths, and those who have failed to explain vast sums of money in their accounts. It is just not acceptable that a former Taoiseach cannot explain the source of £215,000 and yet still draw over €2,000 per week from the public purse as part of his Rolls-Royce pension pot. With each pension payment cashed, it is the proverbial two fingers to the Irish people. The Irish people are suffering enough. They do not need this insult added to their injury. Minister Howlin is bringing in changes in this regard in his public sector pensions bill, but unfortunately, as I understand it, its measures cannot be retrospective. The core area where corruption of the planning process took place was, of course, at local government level, and this is the area which is the focus of the majority of the report's recommendations. Corruption's natural home is in the shadows, unseen and hidden. We, as citizens, need to shine a light onto all our public representatives, including our councillors. Whilst legislative changes have wrested some powers away from councillors vis-à-vis planning, I think one lesson we all need to learn is that we need to see greater engagement between local councillors and the people they represent. Beg your pardon. This is a two-way street, of course, and the people need to place their councillors under the same scrutiny with which they place their local Gardaí, teachers and indeed their TDs. More needs to be done to link the public with their local councillors. Arguably, the most talked about government policy of the last number of weeks has been the household charge. Now is not the time to debate that issue, though it is worth pointing out that the charge and the subsequent property charge to replace it next year are taxes which would be going to fund local authorities. Previously, local authority funding came directly from central taxes, and I believe led to a certain disconnect between the public and their local authority. The fact that people will now be paying directly for their local services will lead to an even greater connection between people and their local council and councillors. However, I must say that I believe that those politicians who are opposing the introduction of local charges and property taxes at this time are mere political opportunists engaged in cynical populism, and I would certainly like to see an end to that in Irish politics as well. The report states that gaps in transparency and accountability have been reduced, though not eliminated. We all need to work to eliminate these gaps. One recommendation of the report calls for anyone seeking a planning permission for a property should have to declare on their application form if they had donated more than €55 to a councillor. Why €55, I might ask? I would go further and say that a person should declare any donation to a councillor from 1 cent upwards. I also believe this requirement should be extended to TDs also. Although TDs have no statutory relationship with the local authorities since the ending of the dual mandate, TDs can have a relationship with their party colleagues on the council, and TDs who are formerly councillors may have strong relationships with council officials. People should be aware, and everyone in this House will be, that it is council officials that grant individual planning permissions and not councillors. Councillors, in fact, do the zoning.
2 minutes remaining.
2. Thank you, Kevin. If we are to really tackle corruption, we should not be naive to the realities of political and party relationships. Political corruption is not a victimless crime. The victims are too many to name and cut across gender, class, religion and creed. The victims of these crimes are the families without promised creche facilities or schools, the children without libraries, the communities without sports facilities or bus routes. I meet these people every day in my advice clinics and on the streets of North County Dublin. Swords is a town of over 50,000 people and is still catching up on the demands foisted upon it by corrupt and totally irresponsible rezoning from 20 years ago. Schools are overcrowded and oversubscribed, public transport is stretched to the bone and antisocial behaviour is on the rise. These are today's problems, but the roots can be traced back to those councillors on Dublin County Council who took grubby little bribes from seedy developers. Those few councillors sold out the people of Swords and North County Dublin who are still paying the price. I welcome this report and I hope that it will mark the beginning of the end of corruption in Irish politics. But we as members of this House must implement the recommendations and do it quickly. Thank you, Laskir.
Thank you very much, Deputy Ryan.